Hey everyone, welcome to Food Talk Live. Before I begin, I want to let her know. I want to let our listeners know about a really interesting event that will take place throughout August and early September. Our friends at Nyman Ranch Pork Company will be having a series of events as part of their Hog Farmer Appreciation Celebration. They kick off this Wednesday, August 5th, and continue weekly through September 11th, closing with a virtual farm tour. On Wednesday, this discussion will be around the future of restaurants with chefs like Mary Sue Milliken of Border Grill, who I'm a big fan of. This is an event that, of course, typically takes place in person. I've spoken at it a couple of times. This year, I'll be moderating a discussion with Michael Pollan on September 8th, followed by a panel with Michael, Nyman Ranch Pork Company founder and farmer Paul Willis, and Don Sherman of Native American Natural Foods. And we'll be talking about resilience versus efficiency in the food system. And I think that will be a very pertinent conversation to what we're having today. But you can join the Nyman Ranch events by going to nymanranchhfad.com. You can sign up for the panels. It should be an interesting couple of weeks. I plan on listening to as many as I can because they've really got some really great speakers and moderators. Our friends at Civil Eats will be moderating a couple of panels as well. So it should be a great couple of weeks to really learn more, not just about pork farming, but also other parts of the food system and what Nyman has done around land regeneration, sustainability, and animal welfare. And that resilience and efficiency theme, again, is something that's so important when we're talking about industrial meat production and when we're talking about alternatives to the current model of meat production. And I'm so glad that we could get David Kay, the Senior Manager of Communications and the first employee at Memphis Meats. Memphis Meats is a startup that has pioneered what it calls cell-based meat, or meat products that are cultivated from animal cells, not from animal cells in lab conditions. He works to really build understanding about how the future of meat can be more sustainable and environmentally friendly. David, welcome to the show. I'm really glad you could do this. We're so happy to have you.
Oh, well, thank you, Danny. I'm really excited to be here.
So several weeks ago, we had Didier Tubia, from one of our friends at Aleph Farms, which is based in Israel, really talk us through some of the science behind cultured meat, cultivated meat, cell-based meat, slaughter-free meat, whatever you want to call it. But I always think it's good to have a reminder. I mean, especially for our listeners, these are kind of confusing words and new terms that people haven't heard before. So could you kind of give us a primer on what Memphis Meats is doing in this space?
Absolutely, yeah. So as you said, we are developing a way to produce real meat without the need to raise and slaughter animals. And we call it cell-based meat. The process at a high level involves starting with obtaining a small amount of cells from high-quality livestock animals. We feed those cells the nutrients that they need, the nutrients that they would naturally be getting inside an animal's body, but we do it
Right.
outside the animal. And we allow those cells to grow and multiply until they produce the meat products that everybody's familiar with and everybody enjoys. At scale, I'm sure you, Danny, and your viewers are very familiar with like what beer breweries look like, for instance. That is what this will look like at scale. There'll be big tanks inside of which we're growing animal cells. And once we harvest them, we can cook and prepare them and enjoy the same meat products that folks have enjoyed for millennia.
So the same meat products, you've said real meat, the same meat products. What will they look like, David?
I mean, they will look like the meat products that folks are familiar with. We've done a few product demos at Memphis Meats. We've done Southern Fried Chicken. We've done Duck L'Orange. We've done a beef meatball. We've done others that we're working on internally. Meat is a very malleable food in that it can be turned into many different types of products.
Right.
And ultimately, we want to be able to produce a production platform that will allow us to make any type of commonly eaten meat that you can imagine.
So it really mimics the taste and the texture and the look, so people feel very comfortable with it if they're comfortable eating meat.
Yeah, we've had many tasters, and the feedback is always the same that this is the meat that they're familiar with. Again, this is not an alternative. This is not plant-based. It's not a vegan or a vegetarian product. It is
Right.
real meat. It's just produced in a different way.
Well, that was kind of my next question. Folks are very familiar now with Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods. This is very, very different. Those are products that are based out, on plant protein. They're plant-based. This is a very different model because you're using the cells from living animals.
Exactly. Our goal is not to produce meat substitutes or meat alternatives. We're just looking at new ways to produce real meat. So it's not plant-based, it's not vegan, it's not vegetarian.
Right. So interesting. Why do you think we're seeing so much growth in this sector over the last couple of years? I mean, your investment rounds have been pretty big. We look at, what Aleph is doing and some of the other cell-based meat companies. Why so much interest?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's an increasing awareness of what the future looks like for the global food system. Demand for meat globally is expected to roughly double by 2050.
Right.
And given the amount of resources required to produce meat, there's just not enough resources on the planet to meet that demand. And so there needs to be innovation and there needs to be new methods of meat production that can supplement the existing meat supply chain to help meet that demand. And so I think that is one of the reasons why I think, you're also just seeing a lot more consumer interest in how their food is being made and, what implications it has for a number of different issues from the environment to animal welfare to public health. And so I think it's a combination of just an increased awareness of, what we will need to do as a global food system to meet future demand, as well as consumers just becoming more and more interested in what their products imply for a number of different issues beyond just things like taste and convenience and things like that.
Absolutely. You said something very interesting. You said this will supplement the existing meat supply chain. And so you don't think of yourselves as competitors with livestock ranchers and farmers who are producing meat.
Yeah, we really don't expect that cell-based meat will completely displace conventionally produced meat. Again, if we go back to this skyrocketing of demand for meat globally, as I said, it's expected to roughly double by 2050. There's
Right.
room for both cell-based meat and meat harvested from animals, and I think likely what we will see is a scenario where there are both options available, and so consumers have choice and they can decide which ones make the most sense for them.
We have a great question from a viewer. What's the nutritional value? Is this an opportunity to make it more healthy with less toxins and antibiotics? Again, excellent question.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Stephanie. So our CEO is actually a cardiologist by training, so he cares very much about these issues. And I think there's two categories that we're very interested in. One, Stephanie, you raised the question of antibiotics. We don't expect to use any antibiotics at scale, and so that's a huge potential benefit from a public health perspective. On the nutrient profile side, we're also looking into ways that we might be able to improve the nutrient profiles of our meat products. So for instance, could you have a steak with the fatty acid profile of a salmon, as one example,
Right.
something that we're
Right.
interested in? I don't know if that will be in the very first products that we bring to the world, but it's definitely something that our team is very interested in exploring.
Well, and having a product that's, has less fat, is healthier, has more, of the good fats instead of the bad. Those are all things you could do right now.
Yeah, they're all things that we're exploring. And
Yeah.
that in theory, there's no reason why we wouldn't be able to improve nutrient profiles.
Absolutely. I want to get back to sort of the demand question and why people are more interested. Obviously you're sequestered in the Bay Area. I think I'm, here in Baltimore. Do you think COVID-19 has increased interest in these alternative meats, these cell-based meats, and even plant-based meats because people are seeing what's happening with the industrial meat supply chain and how abusive it is not to just animals, but to the land and certainly workers. And I think for the first time, people are really understanding that system, is very, very fragile.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's certainly early to say, how this will impact the way consumers think about purchasing decisions in the long term. I do think, and the first thing I should say is that there are so many farmers and employees of food and agriculture companies that are working so hard to make food accessible during this crazy time, and I think we all, as a society, owe them a debt of gratitude. I do think that, once the dust clears a little and we're out of kind of Band-Aid mode and into thinking more of what are long-term changes that we might be able to make, I do think cell-based meat will be an option to help diversify the food system, so that we can, perhaps reduce the risk of issues like this, but also, have a more diverse system so that if these issues do come up again, we're better equipped to mitigate the damage that they can cause. And so I do think you may start to see people who are interested in exploring cell-based meat as something that can help provide a solution for some of these issues.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a really interesting time for reflection. And I think, we are in this period where we're still trying to keep up with, keeping grocery stores filled. And, again, all the frontline workers in the food system deserve our respect and they deserve to be honored. They deserve to be paid well. I wonder if, whether Memphis Meats thinks that you'll come out on the other side of this with, more investors. I mean, I think that's what I'm really trying to get at here, because people are seeing these changes for the first time. For many investors who didn't, think about processing plants and the dangers and, the speed lines and that kind of thing. Do you think that there will be more investment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that we've been in a fortunate position where there's always been a lot of interest in our work from the investor side. We actually just announced a funding round in January of this year. And so I do think there's a good chance that there will be more interest from investors. Whether that translates into, additional capital raises for us,
Sure.
I think it's too early to say. But I do think that there's an increasing recognition that, cell-based meat could be a part of the solution for these sorts of things in the future.
And what about safety at, the plants or the factories, if you will, where those brewery containers that you sort of mentioned? What about safety concerns? Because this will not be the last sort of global shock that we see. There will be others down the pike, I'm sure.
Yeah, so we announced in January that this year we're going to start construction on a pilot facility for producing cell-based meat at a larger scale. And we certainly intend those production facilities to be clean, to be controlled environments, where production staff can follow best practices to minimize the risk of spreading a contagion like COVID-19. So I do think there's opportunities there. Again, a lot of this will be analogous to beer brewing facilities. Not
Right.
all of it, but there will be some learnings that we can take from those. So those are all things we're looking at very closely, and certainly that's the issues surrounding some of the meat shortages and some of the crowding in some of those production facilities are definitely things that we're very interested in.
Absolutely. I kind of want to ask now about price. So we, not these products are not on the market yet, right? So we don't have any idea how much they'll cost. But when the investigation into cell-based meat started, it was at a very, very expensive price point. How do you get it to a point where it's more like the Beyond Meat prices that consumers are willing to pay? It's a little bit expensive, but they think it's delicious, so they buy it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I should say our goal was never to just serve meat to, super high income folks. Early on, we had high price tags for our products, but of course it was a research and development product. So that's common in any sort of research endeavor where things start expensive, but as there are innovative breakthroughs that happen, as scaled up production starts to happen, that price can drop. And so
Yeah.
us, we've seen a drop in multiple orders of magnitude since the company was founded in 2015. We expect, and if we were selling product today, we would not be the most expensive meat on the market. So we've made lots of progress on that front. Ultimately, the goal is to be cost competitive with conventionally produced meat. And I think, for all the reasons that we're expecting our products to require fewer natural resource inputs, some of that should translate into economic benefits as well. And so, it will take some scale. I'm not saying that the first products out the gate will be as affordable as conventionally produced meat, but I think that is where we're headed, and that's always been the goal of this company. So we'll get there eventually. I think it's more a matter of when than if.
Yeah, absolutely. What are the regulatory hurdles that you're facing right now? Because I know this is a long process. It takes years to get some of those things in place.
Yeah, so we started very early on talking to the relevant agencies, both the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. Both of these agencies are going to be jointly overseeing cell-based meat production, which we think makes sense. We think that's a solution that can really play to the expertise sets of both of those agencies. And I think both of the agencies have been really strong partners, understanding that this is a form of food innovation that can help shore up our global food system. And I think they're thinking about it in the right way.
Yeah.
I think, a lot of innovative companies, kind of their tradition is to avoid regulations or try to skirt regulations or not see them as something that should be meaningfully considered. We've always kind of had the opposite attitude. We've baked in how we think about our business and how we think about our product development from a regulatory perspective from the very beginning.
Sure.
Something that I think has really helped us understand what going to market will look like and understand what the regulatory agencies would expect from us.
Yeah, that's I love that you said baked in. It's been part of the mission from the very beginning. I think folks probably have some questions around the environmental implications around this. We talked about nutrition a little bit, and the product won't have toxins or antibiotics. What about the environmental implications? I mean, there's a lot of energy that goes into this. How do you reduce those kinds of concerns? How do you make sure that this is really mission driven and sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, the environmental impact is one of the reasons this company was founded, and it's one of the things that gets us out of bed every morning. And so we do expect that at scale, our process will require significantly less water and land and reduce significantly fewer greenhouse gas emissions. And the reason for that, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, but the reason for that is we can focus all of the inputs of our process into making meat. As opposed to, for a conventionally produced meat, a lot of those resource inputs will go into making, for instance, inedible parts of the animal, like the bone or something like that.
Right.
And so, for instance, to get 1 calorie of beef via a cow requires about 34 input calories. Our goal is to get that input to output ratio down to 3-to-1. So instead of inputting 34 calories to get 1 calorie out, we hope eventually we can get it so that we only need to input 3 calories to get one. And every one of those calories represents an environmental footprint, whether it's a land footprint or a water footprint or a greenhouse gas emissions footprint. And so all of those are areas where we think we can provide significant improvements. Of course, this will require us to scale up, and we're not there yet. But it's something that is on our agenda for sure.
Got it. Got it. I'm really interested because I've dealt with these folks in the past. Good people, but who are very sort of resistant or critical to this type of food production. People who are very sort of tied to what many of us would call traditional land-based agriculture. How do you respond to critics from sort of all sides? So I'm sure, some of the beef lobby groups are probably very critical of what you all are doing. I'm sure some regenerative farmers are questioning you. How do you respond to a lot of these different types of criticism?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that when it comes to starting with maybe the folks interested in regenerative agriculture, when it comes to, because I've spoken with many of those folks as well, And I think it's safe to say the things that motivate them are largely the same things that motivate us.
Right,
They care
right.
about environmental footprint, they care about animal welfare, they care about public health. And I think all of these things are the same things that are getting us out of bed in the morning. And so I think, finding that common ground, recognizing that our means may be different, but we ultimately have the same end, or at least
Yeah.
very similar ends, I think is really valuable. And I think it's honestly, I think it's similar for folks on the other side. You mentioned ranchers and farmers. I think there's a lot of common ground that we can find with them. We signed a letter with the North American Meat Institute on regulatory issues. Some of our investors come from the meat industry.
Right.
Really, I think, if I could sum it up in one phrase, it's this value that we have at Memphis Meats that we like to call Big Tent. This idea that what we're doing touches so many different elements of the food system, so many different elements of life and of society. And why can't we find common ground with a bunch of diverse stakeholders and really chart towards a solution that everybody can get behind? And so that's something that we've really internalized. I mean, we literally have the words Big Tent painted on our wall in our
Yeah.
office, which I haven't seen in a while since I've been working from home.
Right.
But it's something we really try to internalize and to bake into the DNA of our company.
Yeah, I mean, I love that because that's similar to what Food Tank has tried to do over the years is be a big tent, get all these voices. We're not all always going to agree. That is not the point. The point is to have dialogue and conversation, to find common ground when possible, but to realize that these issues are very gray. No one's right or wrong. There's a lot of tools to be used here and a lot to be learned. And I do think it's so interesting that big companies, the Cargills, the Tysons, these big, huge meat companies are now interested in, lots of different kinds of products, whether we're talking about plant-based alternatives or cell-based alternatives. That's a really interesting sort of thing to watch. Having been in this space or sort of following, the discussions around factory farming and meat production for me for like the last 15 years, to see these companies sort of not have a turnaround, but to be really interested in something that they would have thought was their competition before.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like I said, it all comes down to finding common ground and finding areas where we agree. And I think, with the meat companies that have invested in us, I think that's one area where we've been able to find a lot of common ground. And I would just say, Danny, to what you said about Food Tank's work, I went to Food Tank's conference in New York last year, back when we were allowed to be in rooms with large numbers of people. And I really noticed that, and it was so inspiring to see such a wide set of stakeholders who I imagine disagreed with each other on a number of different issues, but they were all there and they were all having good faith conversations, and
Right.
it was very inspiring. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Thank you. No, and we try, and we'll get back to that space again soon. But having these conversations with people like you, having people write in their questions, this is all about the dialogue that needs to be happening, especially right now because of COVID-19. I'm wondering because there are a lot of startups in this space right now that are, doing their own funding rounds. How do you see, I don't know, maybe 5 months from now, maybe 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now, when there are all these companies sort of in this space and you will be competing, for space on grocery store shelves or, that kind of thing. What do you think that this industry will look like when we go to the grocery store? There are going to be a lot of interesting options. There'll be cell-based fish, there'll be cell-based chicken, there'll be cell-based beef. I mean, how are you going to deal with that type of competition versus, regular meat?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that there's so many meat products out there, and the meat industry is just so large in terms of market size. And like I said, it's only getting bigger by leaps and bounds. That I think there's room for lots of different companies in the cell-based meat space, and also in other methods of meat production. I also think that everybody involved in cell-based meat that I know is really doing it is really truly driven by the mission. I've known a lot of the founders of these companies since even before they founded the companies, and they really are doing this because they think it is something that can make the world a better place, and that's certainly
Yeah.
true of Memphis Meats. And so I think there's room for multiple companies in the space. We've had we've done some work with other companies. Most recently, we founded an organization called AMPS Innovation, the Alliance for Meat, Poultry, and Seafood Innovation, which is a coalition of cell-based meat companies based in the U.S. That speaks on behalf of the industry on policy issues and perhaps in the future on certain other issues. And so I think there's a really good relationship that exists between the companies, and I think that will continue again, in part just because everybody really does care about how can we shore up the food system to make it more secure and to meet this impending global demand.
Yeah. Since COVID began, I've obviously been talking to experts like yourself and others and sort of thinking how the food system will transform. And we've talked a lot about choice. Consumers have choice. And, a lot of cell-based meat companies and plant-based protein companies have said, you don't have to give up anything as a consumer. This is something you can enjoy and feel like you're not giving up on something. But as these sort of threats and disruptions and things hit us, whether it's COVID-19 or the impacts of climate change as a hurricane barrels up sort of the East Coast where I live, I should consumers think about making meaningful, really long-term changes in their diets and not be so concerned about choice?
It's a great question, and I think it's such a personal question. I think it has to do so much with an individual's ethics and an individual's decisions about how they want to live their life, how they want their consumption patterns to be. Our goal at Memphis Meats is to provide consumers with that choice. At the end of the day, though, I think it is really important that we just give them the facts and then let them make their own decision.
Yeah.
I don't think it's our place to be doing anything more than that.
Food is so personal and there's so many things attached to it, whether it's your culture or your family or what your grandparents cooked. It is, I think the stronger our food system is, the more choice there will be so that people can find, ways to sort of eat well and still feel connected to, their own culture, their own values, their own personal missions. I'm wondering though, as we have more young consumers who have disposable income and they want the story behind their food, and I know lots of folks who, in a very sort of Portlandia kind of way, want to know like where the chicken came from and who was the farmer and how did she treat the chicken and what did the chicken eat? That's a lot of my life, a lot of my friends, like in a very, sincere way, people want to know the story of their food. How do you tell those consumers who want that story, the story of Memphis Meats?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a really good story to tell. I think one of the things that's unique about Memphis Meats is that, we were the first cell-based meat company founded in the world. And we decided to start talking to consumers and the public to have our media debut when we were less than 6 months old as a company and had like 4 or 5 full-time employees. And it was a crazy thing for a company to do because we got so much inbound interest, and
Right.
we were trying to focus on research and development, but there were all these external actors who were really interested in getting involved. But that was a very intentional decision that Uma, our CEO, made, and I think it was the right one. He wanted to make sure that from the beginning we were talking to consumers about what we were doing, about why we were doing it, about how we were doing it. And that is something that I think has allowed us to start this public conversation. And other companies have since been founded and have also
Right.
done similar things. And I think that's really important because we have a good story to tell. We shouldn't be shying away from it. We should be shouting it from the rooftops so that consumers understand that this new option is coming, and they will have the facts to ultimately make an informed decision for what makes sense for them.
That's great. I think that transparency, that traceability, those are things that people really want, especially now. People's eyes are open in a way that they haven't been open before. And I think, Michael Pollan said it probably 20 years ago, if factory farms were made out of glass, where everyone could see and no one would eat what came out of them. And I think, knowing the story of whether it's, your regenerative farmer raising livestock on pasture or a company like Memphis Meats, people wanted that traceability. They want that transparency. They want that honesty back in the food system. And I think that's really important. Before I ask the final question, where can folks find out more about Memphis Meats?
Yeah, I mean, definitely follow us on social media. We're pretty active on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. We're just at Memphis Meats. And you can also sign up for a newsletter on our website. But social media and the newsletter will be the ways that we communicate our most important updates to the world.
That's great. That's great. So when will people be able to buy this product, David? I think that's a really, really important question.
Yeah, and there's kind of two answers. At a small scale, as soon as there is regulatory clarity on the path to market, then we will be able to start selling products. The product development piece is far enough along that once there's regulatory clarity, we can start doing it. Now, that's at a very small scale. In order to be selling product at a more meaningful quantity that allows us to really start to make an impact on the things we care about, the environment, animal welfare, public health, that will require some more work on our end. And really, it will require building up some additional infrastructure, doing some additional research. And so that's why, the next step there is really on building that first pilot production facility, which I mentioned earlier in the conversation. Once that is up and running, we'll be able to produce meat at a larger scale. And that will really, we'll be off to the races at that point.
So interesting. I can't wait to see what happens and how it tastes and, all the interesting things what chefs will do with it, what home cooks will do with it. It should be very interesting. But thank you so much for joining me today. I think I and our viewers really listened and heard and learned a lot. So I'm really grateful for your time. I want to remind folks that this episode will also appear on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. And I hope folks will join me on our next episode when I'll be talking to Jeanette Weiland, who will talk about her children's book, Red Beans and Rice, and the importance of food culture in the South. Thanks so much, David. Please stay well.
Thank you, Danny. You as well. It was great speaking with you.
Great to see you. Bye.